Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number unknown. I don't know when it's going to go live, but soon. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined for a rare crossover, although they're hopefully going to become less rare as time goes on. MrMattyPlays from Defining Duke, our Xbox podcast. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm hanging in there. It's overcast here in Virginia. It feels fitting for the time of year. This Thanksgiving, fall, winter time. Are you a Thanksgiving person? Do you like Thanksgiving?
I do. I'm going back and forth. Like, I love the holidays itself, but as I grow up, I'm realizing that this time of year is just kind of depressing. Like, it gets dark really early. Yesterday it was pitch black at 4:30. I thought it was 7:00. That and then the snow. Used to be a big snow guy, for example. But then you have to drive in the snow, and you realize, like, oh, this kind of makes my life really inconvenient here. So some of the things that I looked at with glamour when I was younger, I've soured on a bit. But, Thanksgiving, yeah, I like it. Good excuse to eat, get people together, watch some football. No complaints there.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. It's hockey season too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's good.
All right. So I like to just read the comments on Patreon. I try not to listen to too much of Defining Duke just to not seep into the show or vice versa. But I saw interesting comments on episode, let me see what number it was. I believe it was episode 47.
Yeah.
And in the comments, I just like to make sure, usually I like to read the comments just to make sure nothing's broken.
Yeah. Yep.
We sometimes catch things that way before they go live, which is convenient. That's actually the really convenient smoke screen we have at Patreon, is that it catches everything before it goes live to everyone. So you guys are kind of paying to
beta testers.
to beta test our shit. Thanks for that. But on a serious note, I saw that some people were really expressing this agreement with this these statements, I guess, you made about award shows and kind of the incestuous nature of the industry and all this kind of stuff. So what I did was I went in and listened, and I thought that I listened to the proper part of it. But then I went on Defining Duke's Discord, and I was like, hey, just to make sure I'm covering my bases, what are people talking about here? I want to make sure I'm hearing everything Matty has to say. And so they directed me towards a conversation that actually surrounded more Forza and Game of the Year. And I thought that this was an interesting thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I had originally thought, Matty, that we would do building the perfect award show. But in listening to what you were saying, I'm like, there's so many interesting tendrils here that I just wanted to touch base with you on.
Of course.
First of all, I think, and I want to just verify, if you feel that Forza was snubbed for Game of the Year, I would agree with you. Is that a fair assessment of your stance?
Yeah. And just to make it clear, because I don't know how many people listen to Sacred Symbol, listen to Defining Duke Ultimate and Defining Duke. Just to make it clear, though, it wasn't like a rah, we need Xbox there type of thing. It was really a conversation that, as you said, there were more tendrils to it. But if not this year, then when? We had what I would consider a pretty lackluster year. And there were other snubs we could talk about, like Hitman 3, which I think there's a whole conversation to be had on games in the beginning of the year just being forgotten about that are at the top of the pack. But really, it was, again, that situation of this is the best reviewed game of the year. This is widely considered the top of its genre. It doesn't have to win, but if not considered now, then when? Yeah. And of course, everyone's entitled to their opinion. They're not obligated, but it really did spiral into this idea of games created for and supported in a very specific genre, a very specific type, and Xbox is guilty of it. So they sort of fit that mold with some of their games that made the Game of the Year list. And so, yeah, it really did base around that Forza snub, but it's been something that's been building for years, right? There are just these weird nominations that we continue to see. And so I'm excited to talk about this a little bit more because I know you have insight on the voting process, which I'm very curious about too.
Yeah, I feel like listening to you, it was so interesting. I was down in my living room just listening to you and taking notes this morning. And
I'm honored.
Also, Cog was in there. What'd you say?
I was like, I'm honored.
Yeah, no, and Cog, I like to prepare for my shows. And I have, as I always joke around, just littered with just these fucking pads all over my house.
I'm the same way.
And so I feel like, yeah, I wanted to I don't know if I want to evangelize it. I don't think that that's the right terminology. I want to cement in people's minds that these shows and game of the year kind of processes are just broken and stupid.
Hmm.
And reinforces in my mind, and I feel like I have a kindred spirit in you. Now, I might be mistaken, but I feel like I have a kindred spirit in you in saying that I would be happy with no review scores, as I said for years at IGN, and I'd be happy with no game of the year discussions. The only reason that we even do game of the year on Sacred Symbols is because there is some sort of expectation that we will talk about our favorite games of the year. But as we often say, I mean, my list is going to infuriate people this year. I just know it. Like
Same.
I know it just based on how I feel, especially if these are the games that people consider, these 6 games that were nominated for the VGAs are considered the best of the best this year, then I'm on a different page. Um, but is it fair to say I have a kindred spirit in you and that we need to figure out a different way forward? Are you an anti-review score person?
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
yeah,
I yes and no, because I think there's a purpose in the quick summary of knowing a game status, but I also think that hurts the conversation. Like when I deliver a review score, if you will, and I kind of want to know how you view it, if you would even consider this a score. I do buy, wait for a sale. If you wait for a sale, here's the price I would wait for, or just pass it out, right? Would you consider that a score per se?
um, no, I think it's kind of like
It's more conversational in my eyes,
yeah,
but
I think it's deeper than that. I don't
yeah,
consider that a score per se, no,
yeah,
because you can't
and
really reduce that into like an average. You know,
exactly, right. Like you have to listen to the thoughts, and that's not some ploy to get people to sit through the whole video. It's really just like the reason I think the review process is so broken is because at the end of every review is this quick summary of your thoughts. And I've seen even decent, fairly worded reviews that I would agree with get burned because of the score at the end. And that's what matters to people is the quick summary of your thoughts. And so, yeah, I think inherently it does damage the conversation pretty significantly.
I would agree with you. At IGN, which I left in 2014, I was a vocal advocate of getting rid of scores inside to the point where I think people were annoyed and it was like comical to think that it would ever happen. And I
Mhm.
remember actually when Kotaku did it, which I think after I left IGN, Kotaku got rid of scores. I kind of had pointed to Per Schneider, who I'm still very friendly with, and I was like, "See, like someone's doing it." But I don't think you can look at Kotaku as the as a
No.
bill of health either, a bill of good health. So
Yeah.
maybe there's something to that as well. But I've said this on Sacred in the past, and I want to just give people a little bit of insight into a couple of things that I think are relevant in this game of the year conversation. And the reason I don't get deeper into this is because I do it out of respect for Jeff Keighley because um, I don't have anything bad to say about him or the process per se, but Jeff Keighley's a nice guy. He's trying hard. I think he's a salesman and a marketer, and I think he's really good at it.
Yeah.
Um, he's always been very nice to me in person, and as you said, I was a voting member of the VGAs for years, so I know how the process works. And I say that because the process is nonsensical. As I remember when I first started voting in it, like we had like basically we were dumping names into like a Google sheet of game
Mhm.
names. And then I think they were organized by who like supported what. And there is a recency bias, which I have a huge problem with as well. And always tried to remind people of, as you said with Hitman. I think another great example of this for people that have my, predilection for old school games is Cyber Shadow, which came out very early in the year too, and is like almost been completely forgotten about.
Yep.
And so I get concerned about the flippancy in which this game of the year situation is dealt with behind the scenes, at least in my experience, because it's taken so seriously on the front end. And really, when I voted in the VGAs, I thought about it for about 2 seconds. And I really doubt that people didn't do that. Right. And it's
Right.
not out of disrespect. It's just that I'm going to put in as much work into this as you are putting into soliciting my inquiries. And the example, Maddie, that I use is I know people in SAG-AFTRA, they get massive amounts of Blu-rays and DVDs for consideration for all sorts of awards well ahead of time, movies that aren't even out yet in the theaters, nonetheless on DVD and Blu-ray. And they're really tended towards so that everyone knows and understands that we need to get these things bubbled in people's minds. I don't think that's
Mm.
necessarily what needs to happen in our case, but I want to let people know that that happens. And the same thing happened at IGN. The Game of the Year voting was like, nonsense. Right. It just was. And I always said 2012 is a year that sticks out to me as similar to this year, Maddie, in that Far Cry 3 was the game that got ignored that year because it came out too late. As people
Yeah.
will recall, it came out like around this time in 2012. So do you think that, do you think the solution is to, similar to getting rid of game scores, think about a different way of presenting what is best? Because I like the point you made on your show where you were saying, and Cog was saying it too, like it's a racing game. This is an open world game. This is a lot of different things that just doesn't line up with the mainstream press.
Yeah, there's some that are deeper and some that are more surface level that are, I think, easy to fix. And so I'll start with surface level. I think one of them is the timing of the show. I look at it that this is a marketing showcase. Whatever the fact that the first thing Jeff Keighley is marketing was the announcements, and the only thing he's been tweeting about has been the announcements. And I can't wait to show you guys this. He's not talking about the awards. Like, he knows what brings in the money. And again, no disrespect to him. I like that he's got a show that is kind of our flagship award show. I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think having that representation is really important to take the industry seriously. But the fact that we've had Jedi Fallen Order ignored, we've had Super Smash Bros. Ultimate ignored, it's become increasingly clear year after year as these release schedules spread into what were typically dead times, that we need this award show in January or February. Like, we need time for the whole calendar to finish, to sit, and then to talk more. And I think that's possible now. We're starting to see February is one of the busiest months that we know of right now for 2022. Like, there's so many major releases. So you can't tell me it's just a dead month for gaming, or that this is the time investors are cracking. Like, yeah, there's the holidays, but that announcements wouldn't be effective and reveals wouldn't be effective in February, I think, is nonsense. So again, it's hurting games that could be considered pretty significantly, like really good ones where Jedi Fallen Order probably should have been in a conversation, but it never would have made that because the following year was 2020, where it was insane. Like, you had so many other games that just wiped the floor with it. So there are these games that I think are leaving people's minds unfairly when they should be solidified there a little bit longer. Like, in my eyes, and this is just my opinion, like, Jedi Fallen Order was one of the best Star Wars games ever made because
Sure,
it's been a
definitely.
long drought of horrible games, boring games, thoughtless and predictable storylines. And I thought that game didn't have that. So I thought it should have been celebrated in kind. On a
Yeah, I
deeper
actually.
level, oh, sorry,
I'm
go on.
sorry. Go ahead. No, no. I was gonna say I totally agree with you on Jedi Fallen Order. I just wanted to throw that in. That
Right.
was a great game. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
And on no, it's okay. And on a deeper level, I think of it as the critics. I think we have a real issue, and we've talked about this a little bit with game difficulty, for example. I think we have a real issue with the people who are spearheading the critiques in our industry. What I mean by that is they like a very particular experience. There's no coincidence here that if you look at the game of the year list, there's like 3 games in there that are about 10 hours. And I'm just saying, as someone who's talked to a decent amount of people who vote, they like these tighter experiences. They like a very particular type of game, the third person or first person open action based game that's short. Because as the industry has grown up together, you're starting to see these people who are becoming busy with their own lives and too busy for games, even where they prefer, like Metroid Dread, they prefer Resident Evil Village, they prefer Deathloop, these games that can be finished in a night or two, and they can have this like complete AAA experience there. That just speaks to them a lot more. And what's happening is they're looking for a very specific type of game. So those types of games are being made, and we're not having enough representation on these various sites and outlets that are saying, like, hey, let's get some more racing fans in here. Let's get some sports fans in here. Because I'm of the mindset that if we're talking game of the year, we should be considering, and I know it sounds hilarious to say because you got something like EA, which is churning out Madden games that are broken. So I get it. But we should be talking about, like, could a sports game crack game of the year if it's at the top of its genre? Like, we could have a couple of years ago probably talked about MLB The Show.
Right.
Um, we should
Or
be talking
NBA
about racing
2K,
games.
NBA 2K as well. Very
Yeah,
well
I
regarded.
just think there is a issue where and I could be guilty of it to some extent, where people are looking for a really particular type of game and considering only that for their list, and there's not a wider pool of experiences there that's being gathered.
Yeah, you guys had made a point that created this tension in my mind in thinking about it, where it's almost impossible to fulfill the ultimate goal of Game of the Year and being this holistic thing. I think Cog had brought up, maybe it was you, it was one of you brought up Overwatch, which was a really good example of when that was Game of the Year and how that seemed fitting, even though it was foreign to us. And we don't really seem to get the same respect in kind as off the beaten path players, I guess. And maybe that's just the nature of who's playing what. I mean, we look at the sales figures on MPD and in the UK and Media Create and everything, and we see what people are playing, and they're not playing the things that I wish they were playing. Although there's nothing wrong with that. But I
Right.
found in my space, or the space that I cover, PlayStation, I found it to be really weird and strange too, because I'm one of the I guess most well known. I was gonna say greatest. That's not true, but most well known PlayStation. That's up to you to consider. But one of the most well known PlayStation critics in the world. And when I looked at the list, I was like, Deathloop and Ratchet and Clank
Mm-hmm.
are the games from PlayStation 5. First of all, I don't know that any PS5 games belongs on the list, PS5 exclusive, but Returnal. And
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you were saying came to mind for me, where I was like, no, Returnal requires too much of people.
Mm-hmm.
It requires just too much,
And
and
that's sad because no
yeah,
one's going
I
to
agree.
make more complex experiences because they know they're not going to get. I mean, a lot of games nowadays succeed not from their burst at launch, but their legs, their chatter afterwards, the clips that are shared, the constant reminders. This is good. Hey, this is good. Like you brought up Cyber Shadow. It's not enough just to be good day one nowadays. Like you have to be good a year from now, and like constantly in that conversation, and only very particular experiences get that.
You had brought up the idea of the short and sweet game as well, and the monopolization of that kind of notion.
Mm.
I was wondering if you think that there's a monopoly with just Jeff Keighley's influence generally. Um,
Mm.
what I mean by that is this award show seems to have an inordinate amount of weight to it based on it being primarily a marketing show. This isn't the way the Oscars or the Emmys or anything like that are run. So I almost feel like it's not taking itself seriously enough, and that Jeff Keighley has kind of managed to. Again, he's a nice guy. I'm not trying to. It's not like a huckster or something, but he's trying to trick. He's tricked people into kind of taking one and the other, and that they go together. But in fact, there's like a real tension that they don't. And I love what you brought up about this off-cycle thing. Like, why is this award show not in May or something, and give people enough time? Because that's what we do for Sacred Symbols. We won't even render our game of the year in quotes until 2021, because I'm like, we got to take the holiday. I haven't played everything. I have no time
Mhm.
to play
Mhm.
everything. Um, on your end, do you think that Game Pass hurts Xbox's critical credibility by making games seem cheaper? Because I think that there's something to that as well, although Psychonauts 2 is on the list, which would argue against that. But I wonder if there is some
Yeah.
sort of cheapening there, because Psychonauts 2 is on other consoles, which these other games will not be. So,
Yeah.
or mostly won't be. So, do you think there's something there?
There's a prestige to PlayStation releases, I think. Like they don't budge their prices. Kind of almost Nintendo like quality. Like you pay 60 or you pay 70, but don't worry, you're getting that $60, $70 experience where I think there's a different view on Xbox for sure. And we talked a little bit about some media bias that definitely exists there where I look at this is a little bit off track, but I look at something like what happened with Rise of Tomb Raider, where Xbox bought the exclusivity for that. But there hasn't been this loud outcry as PlayStation continues to lock down Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I'm sorry, but I can imagine there are many Xbox fans and PC players who want to get in on that. And it's leaked constantly, like it's there, it's being worked on. But PlayStation continues to hold that down. So I do think that there's a media bias there, but I'm kind of in the mindset that Game Pass enhances it. The reason I say that is because I think a lot of it's about voice and representation, not in the way it's traditionally spoken of, but I just think that people talking about it and having their picks validated is really what Game of the Year is all about for most people. Like it's that I hate to use the broken term, but it's just a popularity contest, um, and people just want to see their game on the list. And by their game, I mean like the players, like the ones that are enjoying it and playing it. So I think Game Pass enhances that a little bit, where more people are playing that thing and experiencing it. And I'm wondering if you're starting to see, for example, like Halo Infinite come out a little bit earlier. I'm wondering if we're seeing companies try to do shortcuts to get into this because it is marketing. Like that's the thing. It is not slander. It's not us trying to kick Jeff Keighley between the legs. It is literally marketing. That's why so many companies get involved. And I'm sorry, but it's why Xbox chose during Gamescom not to reveal Halo Infinite trailers and Age of Empires trailers during their own show. They picked Jeff Keighley's show because Jeff Keighley has this staggering level of influence and ability to gather crowds, which is he should be applauded for. But that impact there cannot be understated in the value that companies see in it and why they're making these specific games because they know the type of eyes that are on it. Not even how many, but the type of eyes that are on it.
I also wonder, just from, I guess, in my own opinion, being a consumer of games, most of my life, I just never really cared. It almost made me wonder why like why people care. It almost is used as like, oh, game of the year is like a bludgeon. It's one of those screenshots that goes on where it's like 10 out of 10. All these outlets gave Last of Us Part 2 or something. And I'm like, who cares? Doesn't it matter what you thought of it? And it almost is used as this cudgel.
Yeah.
I also wonder, Maddie, you brought up another thing as I read my notes about just people not playing games. Now,
I
this
could go.
is, huh? What'd you say?
I could go.
I think you should, and I'm going to let you in a moment. This is a problem for me too. Now, I did this weird podcast like a month ago or so with this random YouTuber, and it ended up becoming this infamous thing where I like blew him out basically, and he ended up deleting the YouTube video and stuff. But a joke that came out of it was that he was like asking me what my quote unquote gaming credentials, right? And I was like, well, my gaming credentials is that I've been playing games for over 30 years. But he was asking me my PlayStation credentials, and I'm like, okay, I have like 125 platinum trophies and all of that. It doesn't matter though. I think people are like, that was a stupid idea and like a stupid way of putting it. I think what people are curious about, like you and me, is not how many achievements or trophies you have, but that those are useful tools to just see games you've interacted with and how long you've played them and what you've done in all these different games. And I have found it strangely suspicious as I become more cognizant of it that a lot of people hide their trophies and hide their achievements and don't really talk about what they're playing. Now, some people will come to me and have come to me many times in the past and said, you don't play enough. And that's up to you. You can look at my trophies. I play pretty much everything on PlayStation. You can look at my trophies and make the decision, the determination if I play enough or not for credibility. That's up to you. I would argue that I play fewer games these days much more completely. But I feel like you're right. And I wanted you to expand on that because I do think it's relevant. If you don't have a wide range of experiences as a critic and you're only playing the AAA games or the console exclusives or whatever, and you're not playing Ender Lilies or Dodgeball Academia or Scarlet Nexus or something like that, then you don't have anything but a mainstream view of what games are. And so you're going to come up with mainstream solutions and mainstream answers. And even when the outside of the box game gets attention, like Gone Home, it's always the same game. Everyone always is like the year 2012, I think it was for Gone Home, or 2013.
Yeah.
That was the game everyone was like, that's our weird game. You know?
Yeah, you're right. It's a collection, right? And I think Celeste was one of those. Not that these games should be shortchanged, but
no, not at all.
It definitely, Hades last year especially, like Hades was that game. There's definitely truth to that. There's definitely a truth to like the collected outcast, right? That everyone attaches to. And I think that's both good and bad because you see indies rise up through that. But what happens is, you pretty much put it perfectly, is just like anyone out there, you don't even have to do this for a living. It's just your opinion is, no nice way of putting it, just less valuable if you're not collecting from a diverse pool of experiences and sizing it up. Like, as an RPG guy, I've played isometric, I've played JRPGs, tactics. There's so many I've picked from, and I know that some of my identity came from that, and it's diversified since then. But I think people come to me for RPG reviews because there's so much I scale it up against. Like, there's so much there, and I look at, again, the mainstream loving, like when we were hearing when Deathloop came out that this was the platform for future games, which I still don't see. Not because I don't like it, but I just don't see what the platform even was. It was confusing in how it was presented, and it was smoke and mirrors once it was done. So did they just fall for the trick because they don't play enough games to know when a game's providing you that illusion of choice and when choice is actually there? Like, that's really important because then you see these far-reaching scores of 10s. And to latch onto that a little bit, because you mentioned like everyone picks that game, right? And they all really attach to it. I think this year specifically is a year where everyone was looking for that game that they could attach the score to, that they could really celebrate. And I think that's why when you look at IGN scores, like, they're really churning out some high numbers. We're seeing GameStop really pumping out some high numbers. And I'm sorry, this isn't even like my opinion. I think it's just objectively, like, the quality for these games is not there this year. Like, it's not high this year. And that's fine. We have our ups and down years. Like, I think of 2014 as an infamously bad year for gaming, just that hiccup between console generations. Like, I think 2021's that's fine. The year wasn't as bad. But I think there was a reach from the press to have a big game that just didn't exist until Halo Infinite, probably. And Halo Infinite will absolutely have its share of issues, but we didn't have that Red Dead. We didn't have that easy choice. So you see people like trying to almost plant their flag, almost call for attention to be like, this is my 10 right here, Deathloop. It's like, that's an interesting choice. No one expected Deathloop to get 10s when they were pounding you with trailers during State of Play.
No.
And so, and it just,
and I also think it's comical that Deathloop got 10s. I mean, having played, I didn't play it very much, but that's because I don't think it's a 10.
It's just, I'm sorry. And I know, there's an argue on pretty much every 10, but I think like something such as God of War, like I don't believe it's a 10, but I can see why people give it a 10. Like something like Deathloop, I don't get. And again, I just think it speaks to the status of the press right now. It's not in a healthy spot. There's not enough diverse experiences to pull from where that smoke and mirrors completely fooled people. I can guarantee that, because as you learn, the game literally sets you on a path, and that there is no creative way to approach like that murder puzzle. It's like, a dumbed down version of Dishonored. And it's like, well, maybe that's what they needed. And I'm sure Arcane identified that. Maybe that's what they needed to get their games popular, because they were too complex, because it wasn't clicking with people, because the simplified stuff clearly works.
You've given me a lot to think about here, because it's fascinating to think about the fusion of the subjectivity of games criticism with the objective truth about games, whatever that might be, whatever you can identify that as, like the frame rate or something, or a release date. But it's funny, I did a conversation earlier today when we're recording this with Tom from Moore's Law is Dead, which is a popular tech channel. And we had afterwards, it's not on recording, but afterwards we talked about Far Cry 6, because he was like, Colin, you've been really going on about how great Far Cry 6 is. And I was so surprised to find out that in his opinion, he was saying that I was right, that this game is being referred to as just the same old thing, the same tired thing. And I'm like, no, I was playing it. I went in with like, oh my God, this is gonna be horrible. Like,
right.
And what surprised me was it's like one of my favorite games of the year. And I think it's so different for a Far Cry game in a lot of different ways. And the reason I asked you about Game Pass earlier was because I felt like maybe the best experience this year for me was Outriders, which is definitely one of my Game of the Year candidates. And I feel like that game felt cheap in some way to some people, because it's like, we didn't pay for it, even though you did. I just wonder if these kinds of things are going to start affecting things. And you're bringing up all these interesting points that just make it more and more complicated, which is why I wonder why anyone even reviews games in the traditional sense anymore, instead of, like you said, going into deep dives or just little encapsulations and so on and so forth. I want to ask you about critics and users. You guys had brought up something interesting about critic reviews and user reviews, and how these things are often disparate. And I think we can all agree that user reviews are not very useful, because they're used usually as cudgels or tools, but it's often because that's the only way that these people can communicate effectively with their publishers and developers that they're dealing with. Do you think that some of the solution to this might be in user awards or in user generated award shows that bypass what I think you have identified readily in your conversation about a pool of critics that are really pretty irrelevant? And to your point, and we don't have to get specific, don't play games, right? Or don't play what I would consider to be a sufficient number or a sufficient hour of games. And I will always put up what I play against any of those people. I feel good about that.
Yeah. I just, again, we don't need to name names, but if you just skim the outlets, some are very public about their lack of playing. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the question real quick?
I'm sorry. The answer was for critics versus users. Do you think that the solution is
yes,
like going more towards the user? I feel like that's a problem, but only because of the cadence that's been set by having to react to things that they don't agree with.
Yeah, it's double-edged sword, right? Because there is that reaction, and then there is the memes. Of course, there's the memes of like, hey, we could get this random game to the top of the charts. Could also be used as, again, like this subliminal marketing push. Like, there's no doubt companies will tap into that and be like, hey, we may not have cracked Game of the Year, but we're your biggest snub, so get us up on that user choice, right? So that's a dangerous game to play in my eyes, because I think it can, again, be weaponized quickly. I think really the solution is just not talking about it at all. But I do think that some type of user representation, like grabbing a pool of games and just saying like, here's your 20 options, you could select 5 of them, and in the priority of which they are. And I think making that a segment would help at least, because if it were taken somewhat seriously, maybe we'd see a game of the year list like we saw for 2021, but maybe we would see a Hitman 3 and a Forza crack this list instead of, I would personally remove Resident Evil and Ratchet and Clank. Bump those off the list because I get it. Like a lot of people really like Deathloop, so sure. But like I think some type of user representation and not just this like weird thing where they've been saying, hey, well, the users count in the game of the year vote. It's like 3% or something. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
it's weighted or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's really small. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't have any influence, and nor do I think it really should in a way, because again, there can be a reactionary sway, a kind of cult movement of like, let's get this game up there. But at least if you save that for a segment, I would think that would be optimal. I just think that there's a lot of ways, again, to have that weaponized by companies and sort of become the people's champion, if you will.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Almost propagandistic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the solution might be to take the other award shows that go on in the industry more seriously and maybe give them more shine? This is another double kind of edged sword with what people pay attention to, but what they're led to believe is important. I'm sure if you go to Kotaku or Polygon and they're like, well, no one reads our stories about the DICE Awards. And I'm like, but you don't make the DICE Awards seem important, even though the DICE Awards are way more consequential than internally. I'll tell you that no one gives a flying fuck about Jeff Keighley's awards compared to winning a DICE Award or a PAFTA if you're on a development team.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe it's up to us to kind of direct people toward their eyeballs and their attention towards the things that are a little more salient and might treat games a little more fairly? And that might even be the GDC Awards and others too. I don't know.
Yeah. It kind of shines a light on what matters. And what matters are the announcements, and it really supports our argument that these are marketing shows here, not game awards. It's to hype you up for new games coming out and boost the ones that were already doing well. And there's a little bit of a surprise in there or two with some announcements that or some awards, sorry. But again, I think there's a reason why not everyone tunes into like the DICE Awards. It's because there's no announcements here. And so I think a lot of people, like you said, they don't care. And those who do care about the representation that of their game that they really enjoyed. And I think some should check them out because I thought it was really interesting that the year The Witcher 3 was cleaning house with its awards, you had Fallout 4 win the DICE Award, which based off what you're saying, it matters more to some companies to win the DICE Award. So it's which one really had that value to the true industry side of things? Did CD Projekt Red collect these public awards and then see Bethesda Game Studios get that with Fallout 4 and go fuck, you'll never know that.
I was surprised by that because you're right. It's for marketing. I think that they would probably want to win Keighley's award.
Right.
But the devs want to win DICE Awards,
Right. And that would make sense. And so, yeah, I think yes, but it kind of rolls back to the review scores and the easy consumption of things and the kind of short attention span demand. What's great about the Game Awards that makes it worth sitting 3 hours through is, you're going to see something that might be cool. It's just that simple. So I would like people to check out these other award shows, but hey, even as an enthusiast who does this full time, I can confidently say I don't tune into DICE. I'll just check the highlights.
Oh yeah, I don't tune in either. And that was going to be my next point as well, is that you can only lead a horse to water. And when you as another horse are almost being I'll just read the recap, which is what I do, and see what won, then that is part of the problem. It also begs the question, Matt, if our industry should even be trying to create facsimiles of what other entertainment silos do. And I just continue to believe that we just try too hard in this industry, or some components of it try too hard. We got to have our big movies. We got to have The Last of Us on HBO. Only will The Last of Us is really going to be taken seriously because now it's on HBO. And
yeah,
I know that that's in their heart at Naughty Dog and at Sony, that it's this thing. It's the same thing with Twisted Metal. The Twisted Metal comedy, all of these kinds of things, they want to leverage it. And I just wonder if can people be kind of satisfied just saying we have our own media and we celebrate it our own way? Shouldn't we try to do something maybe just totally different?
Yeah. And Jim Ryan's comments and Phil Spencer's comments are pretty indicative of that. Jim Ryan saying it was greatly frustrating that he was selling 20 million copies of God of War or something. I'm God, man, if only. Horrible.
Great frustration.
Yeah, right. I get it. They invest a lot into it. They want it to be this big multimedia success, and they think TV and movies are the way to do that. And I think there's a fair thought on that, because you look at something like Netflix's The Witcher, which is based on the books, and it boosted the game's player count above it even when it launched, and throughout its multiple releases and its awards and its fanfare and YouTube critiques, just everything. It took one show popular on Netflix to push it the highest it's ever gone. So I do understand their reasoning behind, like, hey, if we have a good show, like, I'm curious what happens with Fallout when they do the Fallout Amazon show. What happens to 76 maybe? That would be really shocking to see if that just reached new heights. So I do think there's reason to believe, hey, gaming can grow when we dip into multimedia. It's just that you look at the Uncharted trailer. I'm sorry, that's not going to be a good movie.
No, of course not. I mean,
yeah, it's just
no
so
way.
consistently the balls drop because you start to involve people who don't get games. Like, part of the reason Xbox bounced back is because you didn't have Don Matrick at the head of things. You had Phil Spencer, who plays games, and his team, who plays games. And I think that's how gaming really grows, is getting the creatives involved in each of those processes. Like, I think The Last of Us on HBO might be good because, you know, Neil Druckmann's involved directly in it. I think that Fallout on Amazon has a chance because Todd Howard's involved in it. Like, you have these people who helped make these experiences now spearheading them in other mediums. But yeah, I do agree that there is a try-hardy sense that. Would you be able to go into a little more detail, like why you feel that way?
Yeah, sure. I think it's so funny with the Uncharted movie. It's so funny you brought that up because that was one of the things I was thinking about. People might remember on Sacred Symbols, we talked a great deal about this GQ interview that Tom Holland did about the movie, in which he was describing Nathan Drake as if he has never, ever heard of or played Uncharted. He said something to I don't want to misquote him, but something along the lines of, you know, I was standing there with my bulging biceps, and like, we're literally describing like a character. I'm like, Nathan Drake stands there, looks cool with his bulging biceps. Have you ever played in a second of Uncharted? That's not Uncharted at all. He's usually in a lot of trouble. He's fit, but he's not bulging biceps. He's not trying to look cool ever. That's not his whole thing. And so it's what you had brought up with even PlayStation Productions, which is what the movie initiative is going to be called, where I look at this and I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? Who signed off on this? This took 10 years to get off the ground. And you don't even understand your core IP, one of your most important IP, which I think will still be one of your most important IP. I don't think Uncharted is done by any stretch of the imagination. I think you're about to find that out. You know, so I feel like that's really indicative, a nice illustration of this metaverse type fusion where you see these suits, these bean counters at a movie studio that's parallel to PlayStation at Sony. And they're like, well, we must fuse. We must work together because we exist in the same family. I don't have any doubt that some of these shows like Fallout, even Twisted Metal, and The Last of Us, no doubt. I'm friends with Neil Druckmann. I'm wishing him the very best. But that doesn't erase the point to me that we should want others to look around and say, like, how can we do what those guys are doing?
Yes.
Instead of, and sometimes they are. I mean, I think you see Facebook with rebranding itself, like they're going all in on like metaverse kind of gaming and existence, and they're going to spin off Oculus and all of that. But I feel like, in my mind, we should be the 21st century. We should be to the 21st century what film was to the 20th century. The thing everyone wants to strive for, the ultimate piece of entertainment, the thing that, oh, we don't do award shows, or we do award shows our own way, or we figure things out our own way. And don't you agree that might be the best way? Again, I'm not smart enough, Matt, to know what the answer is, but that's kind of what in response to you, it just seems many iterations of that. Even when things do well, Resident Evil, for instance, like, is that really Resident Evil? Those movies, those Mia Djokovic movies or whatever, like, is that really Resident Evil? Does that represent what Resident Evil is, or can Resident Evil only be represented as a game because it's a fucking game? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at sort of, I'm gonna call it the downfall, because I don't know if it'll ever go away, but you look at the Oscars being taken less seriously, and I think there's actually like an opening to be the example, to lead by example. I don't know how they would go about that, but I think the reason we won't see it just keeps coming back to this point is there's just too much money to be made. And like, for example, we forget amidst this award show that there were awards handed out for, I think it was Jeff Keighley's Gamescom show, Opening Night Live. And do you remember they were giving out like best PlayStation game to games that weren't even fucking out?
Yeah,
And it was
it's
unbelievable. Like you could just see the money changing hands right there. Like, hey, give Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope the best Nintendo game, which comes out, by the way, in an unannounced date in 2022. It's like,
dude.
yep, that's the best one.
It's what IGN did with No Man's Sky for 2 years in a row at E3, right? Like just based on promises and smoke and mirrors, you make assumptions and start pre-awarding, and it's really incestuous and fucked up. I think that's why, whether it's overt or not, I think just decoupling all of that from the award show, because if you have an award show that people are watching for, like you said, for the pop and circumstance of the new announcement, then it's not an award show.
I have a question for you.
Yeah,
Oh,
please.
sorry, go on.
No,
You have
please.
more?
Well, I was just going to say, and if there is no answer to that, if there is no way to make people in the games industry tune in en masse to an award show, then there is no need to have an en masse award show catered to an audience. It should just be catered to the devs that care. And there's nothing wrong with that. That happens, by the way, in almost every industry. I don't know if you watch Mad Men. That was like one of my favorite shows. They would always talk about the awards they won, the marketing awards. No one goes to those except for marketers. But that doesn't mean that they don't give themselves awards and that there's not some sort of hierarchy and criteria. But anyway, what were you going to say?
I just want to ask you, this kind of tails into just journalism in general, but my co-host for Ham Radio, Paul, he is studying to become a journalist. And so he's kind of learning the tools and tricks and stuff that you already know as someone who worked in that field for a while. I want to know if you agree with his assessment, which I've found myself lining up with, is that when you look at traditional journalism across really most areas in news, and then you look at games journalism, would you agree with the assessment that games journalism is much closer to PR and marketing than actual journalism nowadays?
Oh, definitely. There's no one. I take a lot of pride in this, and I appreciate it. Like, people still tweet at me old stories I wrote at IGN that are like, this is. I actually just retweeted one yesterday from when we were recording this about a piece I wrote about Insomniac, like a 50,000 word history of. And I'm like, that's still the definitive history of Insomniac. I wrote that 10 years ago. I mean, up to that point anyway. And I agree that on one side, there's no inquisitiveness and no interest. I had to break companies down to let me in to tell those stories for sometimes years at a time. There's no motive on their side to tell anything interesting because they think that they're afraid. Well, they don't think, they are afraid of anything being miscast or misconstrued. And then there's an audience that doesn't. This is, again, goes back to it. There's an audience that just doesn't seem to care, even when there's good journalism, like the history of Naughty Dog, which a lot of people consider IGN's greatest piece of journalism that I wrote in 2013 or something, 2014. That was like 100,000 words or something. That was a massive loss for IGN. There's no doubt that they've lost money letting me do that. I was gone for weeks writing that thing, So there's an unfortunate economic reality, which I think things like Patreon, and especially for your friend or your co-hosts, Substack is a great place for the written word, where there's going to be these micro communities that are interested in these things, but it's never going to rise to the level of the millions of views that IGN got. But that's fine. In fact, we probably both make much more money doing what we do than anyone at IGN, even though they have bigger audiences because they are underpaid and and they're over-serving. So I think there's something at the very top of that system that is self-sustaining, incestuous, and it's why no one trusts it. And I don't think that there's a reason per se why people should trust them, but I understand why they don't. And I've always said that, by the way. I've always understood from the outside why you wouldn't trust me. I get that. That's why I try to be as transparent as possible.
I'm the same way. And there's a fear, I think, within content creators especially, but journalism holds onto it tighter because I think it's kind of their last strand, if you will, is being able to continue to hold access to exclusives. I don't think we have too many companies nowadays revoking access unless you do something like what Jason Schreier did to Bethesda with Fallout 4. They did not take kindly to that, and they completely took him off the list. And now he only gets his information from like employees under the radar there. But I think there's this fear of exclusive access being revoked. Like, I wonder where IGN would be without IGN First. And I think of the great work Ryan McCaffrey's doing there with like Halo Infinite right now, and how much that probably boosts their numbers infinitely when they're getting here's the first preview of Halo Infinite, which took the wind out of the sails of, including mine, everyone's preview afterwards. Like when we all saw it, we were like, fuck, like that's going to kill our video because everyone doesn't want to be spoiled. So they had a chance to see one video and then peace out. So that hurt everyone. And that's dominant for them. And that exclusivity Game Informer cover reveals and their cover stories, it's huge. And it's like, if you're breaking stories, completely leaking stuff, like I feel like games journalism has turned it more into awareness. Like I see more stories on awareness, on representation, which is, I think, important to some extent, but I see that more than the true traditional journalism that I saw probably a decade ago that inspired me to get into the industry. Originally, I was going for informative writing. Like I was studying to do journalism and I just did not like where it was heading. And I was lucky enough, of course, at the same time, YouTube was doing well, where I was like, I'll roll the dice here and try to do my own thing. But I know not everyone's gifted that opportunity, but just where it's headed has become more and more a marketing piece to me.
No, there's no doubt about it. I look back at some of my experiences and realize that I was caught in that weird pincer too, where like my stuff would appear on the PlayStation blog. And I would understand why that would be like, people would be like, what the fuck is your stuff on the PlayStation blog for? And I'm like, we just need eyeballs on our videos. I know it seems weird, but there's nothing more to it than that. But I get it. That's why I think we just need to figure out a new way, because I try to look outside. I've been inside for so long that it's easy to just become, it's actually kind of similar to the notions you were talking about with just the jadedness of even playing games. Mm-hmm. At some point you can't avoid it. And maybe you just need to figure out a different way forward. And my hope is that people continue to take games seriously and have fun with them and do whatever you want with them, but take them seriously enough where we are the prototype that everyone is trying to use and leverage in their own way. And I think there's just a strange obsession with the past in this industry, which is fine. I have a strange obsession with the past, no doubt, but
sure.
I want more for our industry. And that's why I was really keen to just sit and talk with you for a little while, Matty, because I really liked what you had to say on Defining Duke, and I really agree with it. And yeah, I mean, shit, I went with Ryan McCaffrey on the press tour when we pitched IGN first, because I was still there. And we did pitch it as, this is the new Game Informer cover. And no publisher would eschew the Game Informer cover. That was, as you said, and I don't know if people know this as general information, that it was the biggest deal to get your game on Game Informer. It was vital but this is where the incestuousness comes. Who owns Game Informer? GameStop. Why was it important that Game Informer covers were going? Because they would pre-order games. It would come with your game. They would be in the store. It all went together, Yeah. So
yeah, man. And what's interesting is you talk about like the future of interaction. And I think what sucks is that we have something like VR, which I think is kind of like a leader in entertainment and ways to experience things. But you look at another game, I can't believe I failed to bring it up, Half-Life Alyx, which admittedly I did not play, but I've heard this is like a game changer. And because VR is so inaccessible, it's so pricey, that not only was snubbed, but I think that's the experience that probably movies will never be able to touch, for example, that TV will never be able to touch, because there's nothing more immersive than you being there in the world and like grabbing the objects and putting them places, and you being the action star with the gun and actually reloading. Like there's a level there that they cannot touch. But the issue is that I think that next level is so many years out that games can only, as a industry, I should say, emulate for now until that next echelon is more accessible. But that's going to take a lot of time and evolution of technology for prices to get knocked down. Like the Quest 2 looks great, but then there's this confusion of like, you can only play this on your Rift S. You can only play this on your Quest 2. And even I was very surprised by that. As a Rift S owner, I thought I was set for years. But then I find out that this Quest 2 comes out, it's much better. And there are games I can only play there, like Resident Evil 4 VR. What? I don't get that.
Too bad.
So,
that sucks, especially because that looks so good.
Exactly. So, you just kind of have to sit on the sidelines. And again, I think that's where games go next, where at least on an entertainment front, that can be looked to is like, we want to do that. How do we do that? But on an award show front, I think because the Oscars were so dominant for a while, I feel like we sort of have that now with the Game Awards, but it's also come with all of its problems too.
As we wrap up, I want to end with something positive or at least proactive. And I won't put you on the spot to have to answer in kind, but I just wanted to let the audience know off the top of my head, like kind of how I want to handle this moving forward. Like how can we make it, or I make it, or you make it a little bit better, at least in our sphere. And the one thing that I want to do is I want to continue to be fair about game of the year. I have a rule on Sacred that no one plays anything they don't want to play. And I think that's what's important. Like Dustin probably plays more than any of us. I'm probably in the middle, and Chris plays the least. It gives us all different perspectives. And so I like that. But I think what we have to do is continue to communicate the games that we're playing. I want to actually do a show of Sacred Symbols about the calendar year and about like where we were, like what we were playing when, by going over our trophies and just examining why we were playing things, how we were feeling about them. And then we can give listeners the most information they need to get to know us as best as they can. Then when we render these decisions about what our favorite games were, they'll know exactly how to triangulate all that information in an effective way. And then I think the second thing that I have to do, and will continue to do, and I'm being better about it, I think, is just tapping into those places that I just know none of us touch. And Call of Duty is a really good example of that. We're going to have a Call of Duty Sacred Symbols Plus spoiler cast and review discussion, but that's coming from people that play the game. Ben, our associate producer, and Micah, our coordinator, are going to do that because I think it's important. It's like, how the fuck can we not talk? How can we not talk about Call of Duty just because none of us played? That's ridiculous. A couple of weeks ago, people will remember I had someone on that was an expert on Gran Turismo, because that's going to be a massive game. Gran Turismo, 7 is going to sell 10 million copies all told, probably more. And the fact that we don't cover it doesn't mean that it's not important. So those are the kinds of things that I want to be proactive, just to kind of be, it's the second rule we have too on our wrap-ups, where we try to mention every game coming to PlayStation at least one time, any game, just to get it out there in the ether. So we'll try to continue to be better to give more balance, but I don't know if anything else comes to mind about how you are going to try to make this better or try to alleviate this stress.
Yeah, definitely. What you touched on, especially with like Gran Turismo, is exactly what was happening with Forza and Defining Duke. I kind of learned the hard way because I groaned a little bit during the E3 reveal, and a lot of the audience got on my back for it. It's a joke now, but it was a lack of understanding the importance of it, and that was a very important lesson to be learned there, because I've always prided myself on really, outside of, I'd say, puzzle games, diving into the deep end on everything, because I think one of the most valuable opinions, like, people sell their opinion short rather, because there's value in being an expert in a genre and saying, here's how I feel. There's value in saying, this is my first time playing this series, here's how I feel. Like in the case of Forza Horizon 5, people know that's not my bread and butter. I'm an FPS guy, I'm a RPG guy. Like, this is not my bread and butter. So there's value in like, hey, I'm the casual ass racing guy. How do I feel about this? And I think understanding that, what that means to the audience, is really important. So that's one of my ways of addressing it, is like continuing to just, check out those games. Of course, the issue we have is with Game Pass, there's such a staggering level of like day one drops, intriguing releases, ones that you've missed, where Xbox's third party almost feels first party in conversation because they're so closely tied together. Like if it's day one Game Pass, like Outriders, I always say like Outriders is like an Xbox game to me at that point. It is. Same thing with Back 4 Blood. It's an Xbox game. It's like it's too closely tied together. So sometimes there's that pressure where you end up playing an unrealistic amount of games and things glance. So that's where I'm trying to figure things out, is being more calculated. I try to be receptive to feedback. I don't see it much. I've seen it once before where it was enough to stick with me, like that I can ramble a lot, that I talk a little too much. And I believe in the assassin's approach, I call it. Like, I want to be like a dagger when I speak. Like, I want to be pinpoint, precise, get my point across, and have that be as effective as possible before I move on and speak again. And sometimes it means just shutting up. And so I think there's value in that too, is like speak when it's needed. I as a YouTuber, like I'm very used to today. With podcasts, you can go tomorrow. And so that's the other thing, is like the patience of coverage, where, we talked about shifting dates for recordings for Defining Duke and whatnot, but you realize it's like, let's just make a really good show.
Right.
That when people sit down, that's very informative, the best show you can get. And the date becomes not that big of a problem anymore suddenly.
You're right. I think the other things that we can do and will continue to do is to just try to celebrate games on a more microcosm level. Like I was thinking about this thing we used to do. I don't think they do it at IGN anymore, but Game of the Month. And I remember doing that, and we made almost Game of the Year style videos for games every month that we liked. And I remember Shovel Knight once won once, which is like a beloved game of mine. And that was like the only way that was going to get into that conversation. So we can figure out ways, to do that as well. But Matty, this was fun. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
Of course.
And appreciate all you out there as well for supporting Last Stand, Defining Duke, Sacred Symbols Plus, all that. Of course, you can find Matty on his other content as well on YouTube, MrMattyPlays, and his podcast Ham Radio. Otherwise, you know where to find us, and we'll see you next time for more Sacred Symbols and Sacred Symbols Plus. Until then, goodbye.
Take it easy.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.